I want this to be really clear. There has not been a more destructive force in the American jurisprudence in the last 30 years than Clarence Thomas and his wife. They are the most destructive force in American jurisprudence. Those two together, they form like a Voltron of evil. Yesterday, the extent of just how thorough and intentional their efforts have been came into light in new reporting from Politico. And you won't be surprised to hear that some of the key players involved, included Texas billionaire Harlan Crow, Federalist Society founder Leonard Leo, and Trump political consultant Kellyanne Conway. Shocker. What Politico uncovered was that the justice's wife was essentially running a political organization that will push conservative ideas through the courts and into her husband's lap. The group, called Liberty Central, was set up while Barack Obama was president to target the Affordable Care Act and was launched just before the Supreme Court ruling on Citizens United, which paved the way for unlimited dark money from groups like hers in our elections. It was speeded up and funded by Harlan Crow and headed by Leonard Leo. Ginni Thomas was forced to step down from the organization because she got in trouble for calling Anita Hill and demanding an apology from Hill for recounting her experience of being sexually harassed by Clarence Thomas when she was at the EEOC. Don't worry, Ginni Thomas launched a new nonprofit consulting group, and according to Politico, Leonard Leo found a different way to funnel her cash with no apparent paper trail. Kellyanne Conway would serve as the conduit for that. Leo arranged for between $80,000 and $100,000 to go to Ginni Thomas through Conway for unspecified work in 2011 and 2012. As she stepped back, Leo reactivated a nonprofit group, the Judicial Education Project, which would take a very public role and file numerous amicus curiae briefs before his friend's Supreme Court. Here's where things get tricky, and trust me, this is tricky. The Judicial Education Project is tax exempt as a charity and has to file forms to keep that status. It is a legal requirement that their funds are used for charitable or educational purposes. Politico's reporting and subsequent probes have raised questions that Leo's groups have taken advantage of tax disclosure laws to send additional business and funds to Ginni Thomas, amongst other activists. Joining me now to pull all of this apart is Melissa Murray, NYU law professor, MSNBC legal analyst, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast, and fellow Wahoo. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining me this evening. Look, I always start with this, even before we get to the specific story. Can you tell me why Clarence Thomas is not going to get impeached? I know we talk about this all the time, but every single time I hear this guy, every single time we hear about more corruption, I'm singing, I'm Backstreet Boys. Tell me why? Why can't this guy just be impeached? Why aren't we doing anything about this?
Well, he can't be impeached because there would not be a supermajority in the Senate to do so. But you are exactly right, and your intuition is correct. Any other justice at any other quote unquote normal time in history who is associated with this level of questionable activity, this level of skepticism for his impartiality, there would be clarion calls for his resignation. And if no resignation was forthcoming, there would be calls for his impeachment. This is not something Thurgood Marshall could have gotten away with. This is far more than Abe Fortas resigned for. But yet, here we are, and there seems to be no check on that which the Thomases can be associated with and continue to have Justice Thomas serve on the Supreme Court.
You know, Thomas once wrote in 1991, during his confirmation, you know, buffeted by sexual harassment allegations, he said that he and his wife were brought closer together. The fiery trial through which we pass had the effect of melding us into one being, an amalgam, as we like to say. Now, I call it corruption Voltron, but I think the fact that Thomas himself has been very clear about the fact that, you know, where Ginni's politics begins and his end, that there is no space, there is no difference. Is there something that, bare minimum, at least the government should be saying publicly regarding any of his rulings? Look, if there's not a supermajority to get him removed from the bench, why is it that Republicans who have ethics and Democrats who are concerned about democracy aren't banging the doors on this every single time he makes a ruling? Because nothing that this man says can be trusted if he's in the pocket of his wife and her corrupt MAGA friends.
To be clear, the Thomases have said conflicting things over the years. They've said that although they are best friends, melded together in this crucible of conservative grievance, they do not discuss the work that he does in the court, nor does he discuss with her work as an independent consultant for conservative causes. But again, that may belie what some might take as a little bit of fiction. It's hard to say what spouses do and do not talk about. But leaving aside whether or not there is an uncomfortable association between his dealings and hers, it is the fact of the optics that this looks so bad. It doesn't actually have to be any impropriety. It's just the mere fact that it could appear to the ordinary member of the public that Justice Thomas perhaps is in the bag for some of the causes with which his wife is associated. And that is enough to bring disrepute on the court's decisions, and indeed should be enough to inspire those in Congress who have some oversight to this other branch of government to say something about it. But yet we've heard precious little.
And Melissa, this is another key part about this. We keep hearing about these different consulting companies that Ginni Thomas is a part of. She starts one group, she steps down. She starts another. It's basically like a New York Street shell game. Hey, where's she getting paid? Where's she getting paid? Find a dollar, find a dollar, find a dollar. Is there a possibility that Congress could at least push for more requirements for reporting of spouses' income? Is there a way that we can go after Ginni Thomas where at least all the different ways that she seems to be bringing in income through these shadow organizations that pop up every 5 minutes that also seem to have insight as to what's going to be coming down to court? Is there a way she could be held more accountable, even if you can't go after Clarence Thomas himself?
I think that's a terrific place to start. I mean, one of the things that was so interesting about the Citizens United decision that you mentioned, that decision from 2010, was that Justice Kennedy, who wrote for the majority, assumed that where there was greater money flowing in from all different sides of the political spectrum, there would also be greater transparency. Interestingly, Justice Thomas filed a separate opinion in that case in which he disclaimed the prospect of such disclosures on the view that it would chill political contributions and political speech. But again, that kind of transparency is exactly the sort of thing that you want associated with the Supreme Court. And so, again, there have been so many questions this year about ethical lapses among the justices that, at a bare minimum, having greater transparency about where the justices' money comes from, where the money that is sort of brought into their broader family kitty comes from, would be very welcome. And again, would simply be a step toward transparency as opposed to any step to take down a particular justice.
I want to ask this very quickly because, look, people who are professionals, they tend to have relationships with other professionals. Lawyers marry other lawyers, doctors, politicians marry people, everything else like that. We have this situation down, as recent reporting from Jezebel, a judge deciding the fate of abortion in Florida is married to the state rep who sponsored the 6-week ban, and they're not recusing themselves. You have judges that are elected that are related to politicians. We have politicians who are married to members of the media. It's not like we can tell people that they can't love and be involved with who they want to love. But is there a possibility, even when looking at this case in Florida, that a more ethical or responsible government could say, hey, look, if you are sharing a house and a home and a bed with somebody, you probably shouldn't be ruling on any kind of legislation that they're putting forward? Is that a possibility ethically?
Again, in the federal courts, lower federal court judges, not Supreme Court justices, are bound by a pretty loose, but nonetheless, they are bound by a code of ethics that would require recusal in certain cases like that one. You're not allowed to hear a case where a member of your family would be a party. And various states have also judicial codes of ethics that would require them to disclose that information and perhaps recuse themselves as well. And again, if your spouse is closely associated with legislation that you are now ruling on the constitutionality of, it does seem to be too close an association. And again, it doesn't have to be the case that you're in the bag for your wife, but it is the case that the optics of it look poor to someone else on the outside.
Yeah, he's in the bag like leftover fries in the bottom of a thing for McDonald's. Thank you, Melissa Murray, so much for joining us tonight on The Readout. I appreciate it.